The UN is warning that a full-scale humanitarian crisis is unfolding in Ethiopia, where a two-week conflict in Tigray is threatening to descend into civil war. Up to 30,000 people have fled a government offensive by Ethiopian forces against Tigray's powerful local leaders, the TPLF. Hundreds have died in the fighting. The government has rejected calls for mediation and had this message earlier.
Ringleaders. They wouldn't spare. They wouldn't hesitate to strike anybody around, so that they can create havoc and hysteria in Ethiopia, and that would result in civil war. So that's why the government has to destroy their armaments, which have been discovered, and now we keep on destroying as we go along.
Well, it's almost impossible to verify any information from Tigray. Virtually all communications are blocked. These are the latest pictures we have from the region. This was broadcast on state media. It's said to show celebrations by federal troops arriving into the town of Raya Alamata. The onslaught continues. Earlier, Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed warned that a three-day deadline for local forces to surrender has now lapsed. He posted this message on Facebook, threatening final enforcement action in the coming days. In the past few hours, he said his troops are marching on the regional capital, Mekelle, which is held by the TPLF, and he's claiming significant victories. 5 million people live in Tigray, and aid agencies warn they're unable to reach those who need help because of the deteriorating security situation. Here's the UNHCR's assessment of what it's hearing about the situation in Tigray.
We're needing desperately to have access, unhindered, unconditional access to the refugees, but also the other 600,000 among the population of Ethiopians who depend on a humanitarian assistance. We have had no responses so far. We also need access to bring in supplies, fuel, very little food in the market. Cash is non-existent because the banks have been closed for weeks now. And so it's really a dire humanitarian situation that we're facing that we haven't seen for over 2 decades in this part of the country.
Well, this is playing out across Ethiopia's border. The UN estimates 4,000 refugees are crossing into Sudan every day, and we're told half of them are children. This border crossing is now overwhelmed. We're told many arriving here are hungry and exhausted from the heat. Conditions are very poor. There's no electricity or clean water. And this is the Rakoba camp, which once housed refugees during Ethiopia's famine in the 80s. It's been closed since the 2000s, but it's now reopened to cope with the influx. Here's another UNHCR spokesperson, Dana Hughes, assessing the situation in Sudan.
Because this is an area that hasn't seen displacement, as I said, in well over a decade, almost 2, this is an area where we had a reception center for about 300 people. And now it's trying to, keep track of at least and help about 15,000 people, with more people coming. We have taken immediate steps working with the Sudanese government to try and provide assistance. We've identified a site about 80 kilometers away from the border that we are trying to at least set up a settlement or a camp, someplace where people can go so we can give them immediate assistance.
Well, the refugees from Tigray are also reporting horrific accounts of the violence in the region, including street shootings and machete killings. Here's Dana Hughes again.
I think that this happened so quickly that, the refugees that we're talking to, they're stunned. There's a woman that we interviewed, and she talked about how less than a week ago, her life was fairly normal. And for 5 days, she's been searching for her husband. She had to grab her children, and people just ran. They ran with really nothing more than what was on their backs. So I think at this point, what people are hoping for is peace and to be safe and to be secure.
Well, Beverly Ocheng is our sub-Saharan security analyst in Nairobi. Beverly, how reliable is the information we're getting from Tigray, and what more do we know about what's going on there?
Well, the latest appears to be that Ethiopian forces have been able to make victories in eastern and western Tigray and are advancing towards Mekelle. Yesterday, diplomatic sources said that there had been bombings in the capital, Mekelle, but then Ethiopia has denied this in another statement and said that it is making precision strikes and there have been no civilian casualties. But we can see thousands of people are fleeing the conflict, and the kind of stories coming out from UN agencies and even those arriving in Sudan are quite terrifying. Ethiopia, on its part, seems to be very keen to control the narrative of the conflict. It started a new Twitter account which issues daily updates. It's called State of Emergency Fact Check, but it's difficult to corroborate or independently verify that information. In Tigray, officials have made use of the state TVs to issue statements, not so much updates from the front line, but strong rhetoric on the potential impact of the crisis, both for Ethiopia and the region, and also to issue threats. So it doesn't seem as though there'll be anything that will either focus on the humanitarian aspects of it, or it will just cover that up. And most of what we're seeing is just a strong building towards a more spiraling conflict.
And what defence capabilities, Beverly, does this local force, the TPLF, have? How strong are they?
So the Northern Command, which sparked off the conflict after the TPLF attacked it, is said to be one of the most well-equipped. Of course, there's very little clarity on what is there, but it makes sense because the TPLF had been the governing force for many years, nearly 27 years. But then TPLF strategy is probably more of concern. It's creating what seems to be a long drawn-out conflict. When Prime Minister Abiy announced the operation, he said that there would be limited aims, but then the TPLF forces managed to fire into Asmara over the weekend. They also fired into the Amhara region, which shows the potential of it brewing into a bigger conflict and drawing in many actors. Furthermore, TPLF leaders are very experienced in warfare. When you think about the Eritrea-Ethiopia border war in 1998 to 2000, or even the 1970s fighting against the Derg and being able to coordinate that kind of power. So it is quite a strategic and experienced threat.
Beverly, stay with us for the moment, but this, of course, hasn't come out of the blue. Tensions have been building for years between the federal government and the Tigray People's Liberation Front, which runs Tigray. That came to a head back in September when the government postponed national elections. The TPLF defied the ban. It held a vote anyway. That was declared illegal. Now, the TPLF sees the federal government as illegitimate, accusing Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed of trying to extend his time in office. And that's a charge Mr. Abiy denies. Here's the analysis of Kalkidan Yibeltal in Addis Ababa on what support he has.
In the initial phase of his tenure, he seemed to enjoy wide popularity, but that appeared to have dwindled now. And since this conflict broke out, he seems to be enjoying some popular support, at least for the military offensive. For example, in the capital, earlier today, there were calls by his administration to show support for the defense forces, for the armed forces, and there was a lot of the clapping and shouting and screaming and singing. People were expressing their support.
Well, last year, the Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed was celebrated worldwide when he won the Nobel Peace Prize. When he accepted the award, he called war the epitome of hell. The Financial Times tells us how this is playing out now. The declaration of hostilities is likely to further undermine, if not destroy, his fading reputation as a leader who can unite Ethiopia under the banner of liberal democracy. Let's go back to Beverly Ochen. Beverly, what a difference a year makes.
Well, yeah, that's certainly true. I mean, it seems as though his credentials are severely eroding. And over the period where he's had tensions with the TPLF, there's been very strong rhetoric coming from him. And right now, he has rejected any calls for talks. And many people expected that he would perhaps pave the way for talks. He seemed like a reformist when he came into power. But I suppose many of the changes that he was implementing, including to the political system and postponing the election, it raised a lot of political tensions. And in some ways, this conflict was a giving in to the kind of rhetoric that was brewing over all these months, and perhaps a bit of a letdown for many who felt that he was going to be a change maker.
Beverly, thank you very much. Beverly Ochen there from Nairobi, describing the situation that is going on right now in Ethiopia.